Welcome to Karma Chronicles. Please like the video and subscribe. Let's begin. I've been working on this farm my whole life. It's been my blood, sweat, and tears, literally. My dad, Roy, started it all years ago. Back when we were still scraping by, barely making enough to pay the bills, he was convinced organic farming was the future. I'm not sure if he had some big vision back then or if he was just stubborn, but he made it happen, and slowly we built this place up. It's a small company, growing, but there's pride in that. I've been here through every season, working the land, managing the operations, keeping the place running. My sister Lila, though, she took off to study agriculture business, all the way across the country. Smart, ambitious, a natural fit for the corporate world. I stayed behind. Dad always called me his hands-on girl. But Lila, she thought I was stuck. "You'll never get anywhere just sweating in the dirt," she'd say, always with that little smile like she was better than me. It stung every time. But one day, I developed this new farming technique that actually increased our crop yield. It was a big deal for us, put us on the map, earned us some recognition. Dad was proud, but it was like a passing thought. "Good job, kid," he said, and that was it. Just a quick pat on the back. Lila, on the other hand, was off at some fancy internship, scoring all the right connections and still looking down on me. But what did she know about hard work? The farm has grown. We went from barely making enough to cover costs to bringing in $5 million a year. But lately, I've been feeling it, like I'm not really seen. Not by Dad, not by Lila. All my work, all those late nights and early mornings, they're starting to feel like they don't matter much at all. It wasn't always easy, but I threw myself into the farm. I spent long hours in the fields, sunburned and sore, pushing the limits of what I knew. And when things weren't growing the way they should, I figured out why. I tested new techniques, learned about soil health and water conservation, all the things Lila would never waste her time on. She was busy with her shiny job, climbing that corporate ladder, while I was here, sweating, experimenting, making things work. Every few months, Lila would come home for a weekend visit, and it never took long for her to drop the usual judgment. "Jenna, you could be doing so much more. You're smart. Why are you still out here with dirt under your nails?" She'd look at me like I was wasting my potential. It made me feel like I was stuck in a cage while she was out there flying free. It hurt. But the thing was, I didn't want her pity. I didn't need her to tell me how to live my life. Then it happened. I managed to land us a contract with a local grocery chain. It wasn't huge, but it was big enough to get our name out there. A recognition, a little validation for everything I'd been working for. My heart lifted when I saw the first shipment of produce going out the door, the pride swelling in my chest. And Dad? He was impressed. Definitely. He patted me on the back, told me I was doing great. But it was just like the last time. His praise was quick, passing, and then he was back to the grind. That's when it hit me, for real. No matter what I did, it always felt like Lila was the one getting the attention. Every success of mine was overshadowed by her academic excellence. She had a polished resume, a business degree, and an internship with one of the best consulting firms in the country. Every time she spoke, it felt like she was reminding me that I wasn't enough, that my achievements, all my hard work, were nothing compared to the path she was on. I couldn't help but watch her when she came home. She'd show up in her perfectly pressed suit, all polished, smelling like some expensive perfume. She'd stroll in like she owned the place, all smiles and confidence, while I was out there, wearing the dirt I worked with like a badge of honor. It made me so damn angry that I could never get her to see what I was doing, to understand how much of myself I poured into the land, into the farm. And then there was Dad. He was proud of me, I could tell, but in that quiet, unsaid way. He'd never say it outright, and it wasn't like he didn't see how hard I worked. But Lila? She was his golden child, the one he could brag about to his friends, the one with the fancy degrees, the career prospects. When she'd talk about her success, I could feel Dad's eyes light up in a way they never did for me. It wasn't intentional, but it still stung. The farm was growing, slowly, steadily, with all the blood, sweat, and hours I'd put in. But the more I built, the more I realized that no matter how big the business got, I was never going to be enough in Lila's eyes, or in Dad's. And it wasn't just that they didn't understand what I was doing, it was that they couldn't see the value of it. Not the way I did. So I kept doing it. Kept working, because there was nothing else I knew how to do. Even when it felt like I wasn't getting the recognition I deserved, I didn't stop. What else could I do? The farm was my life, It wasn't about the praise anymore, it was about proving I could make it work, even if they never really understood. When Lila came home after 5 years in the corporate world, it was like the air shifted. She walked in with that same confidence I'd always envied, like she had the whole world figured out, and it pissed me off in ways I couldn't even explain. But then she dropped the bomb at dinner one night. She was ready to take over the farm's marketing and business strategy. My heart sank into my stomach. "We need to bring this farm to the next level," she said, looking at both Dad and me like she was doing us a favor. "Jenna, you've done great with the operational side, but this place is barely scratching the surface. It needs someone with a real understanding of business to grow." Her words hung in the air like smoke, and I could feel the sharp sting behind them. It wasn't just about her plans, it was about what she was implying, that I didn't know what I was doing, that I didn't have the right tools to take this farm any further. Dad didn't even hesitate. "She's right," he said. "The business needs someone who can see the bigger picture, someone with a solid background in business." I stared at him, my chest tight, as he said those words without a hint of hesitation. It was like everything I'd done, everything I'd worked for, had been wiped away. All the late nights, all the sweat, the long hours I'd put in, none of it was worth anything without a degree. I didn't argue. I couldn't. There wasn't even a point. I knew what he meant, even if it hurt like hell. Lila had the qualifications. She had the education, the shiny resume. What did I have? Dirt under my nails. The farm was mine in every way except for what really mattered. "All right," I said, pushing the bitterness down. "I'll handle the operations. You focus on the strategy." It was the only option I had. So I said it, but it felt like I was swallowing a lump the size of a boulder. I didn't trust her, not fully, but I didn't have the luxury to stand my ground. Not when Dad had already picked sides. Over the next few months, it was like I wasn't even part of the farm anymore. I was just the worker. Lila dove in, rearranging everything, making calls, pitching ideas. Slowly, the farm's operations started changing. It wasn't about what worked in the soil anymore. It was about what would sell, what would look good on paper. And she took credit for it all. Every little improvement I had worked years to perfect. Suddenly, it was all her ideas. Every meeting she sat in on, every client she wooed, every investor she impressed, it felt like I was being erased from my own life. Like my hands-on approach wasn't just undervalued, it was irrelevant. But what really broke me was when she started talking about innovations she supposedly introduced, innovations that were based on the techniques I'd spent hours perfecting in the fields. She even talked about restructuring some of the farming methods I'd developed, like it was her idea. And Dad? He didn't even notice. He was too busy with whatever big idea Lila was throwing at him next, too wrapped up in her polished presentations and corporate jargon. I tried to keep my head down. I focused on the dirt, on the crops, because that's what I knew. But every time I saw Lila in a meeting or making some new announcement about a breakthrough, it felt like the ground under my feet was shifting. All that effort, all that work, suddenly didn't feel like it was mine anymore. It was like I was invisible, working harder than I ever had before, and watching everything I'd built fade into the background. And as much as I hated to admit it, I still wanted her approval. I still wanted Dad to look at me the way he looked at her, proud, amazed, like I was the one who mattered. But the more they gave her credit, the less it felt like I had a place here. And I knew I couldn't keep swallowing it forever. I kept my head down, working harder than ever. Out in the fields, I was still the one making things happen. New farming processes, more efficient irrigation methods, better crop rotations. I was pushing things forward while Lila handled the business side of things. The thing was, she wasn't just handling it. She was taking over, and she was taking credit for everything I'd done. Every time I heard her speak about the farm's new innovations, I could feel my blood pressure rise. She was presenting ideas like they were hers, even though it was my sweat that had built them. The more she made those public appearances, the more I started to feel invisible. She'd be the one in front of cameras, shaking hands with clients, holding up the shiny, polished image of the farm that barely resembled the truth. She'd show up to meetings with investors and clients, leaving me on the sidelines, like I didn't even belong in the room. I was doing all the work, and she was taking all the credit. It was suffocating. And what stung the most was that Dad wasn't stepping in. He was too busy letting Lila run the show. Maybe he didn't even notice, or maybe he didn't care anymore. Then came the meeting with the major distributor. I was barely invited, just a seat in the back, while Lila took the lead. She'd been in meetings like this before, talking numbers, talking about the future of the farm, but this time it felt different. She was announcing a whole new direction for the business, and I wasn't on board. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was talking about shifting our focus entirely, abandoning what we had built, chasing some corporate model that I didn't agree with. It wasn't about the farm anymore. It was about profit margins and what looked good on spreadsheets. Jenna, we need to scale up, Lila said, with that confident smile that always made my stomach turn. We're going to move away from the direct-to-consumer model and partner with bigger chains. It's the only way we'll survive in the future. I could feel the weight of her words settle in my chest. That wasn't the farm I had worked for. That wasn't what we were about. But I kept quiet, sitting there in the background, letting her dictate the future. I wanted to speak up, to say something, but my mouth felt dry. Lila wasn't listening. She wasn't even looking at me anymore. I was just a shadow. And the more she spoke, the more I realized I wasn't even part of her plans. And then came the speech at the business conference, the one that made everything click into place. I'd known Lila had been rehearsing for it, practicing her words in front of a mirror like she was some kind of corporate queen. When the day came, she took the stage, smiling brightly as she spoke about how the farm had overcome adversity. She talked about her journey, how she had faced challenges, turned things around, and now the business was on the rise. Her words were so polished, so rehearsed. The problem was, there wasn't a single mention of me. No mention of the years I had spent perfecting the farming techniques, the new methods I'd developed that kept us afloat. It hit me then, in the middle of her speech, like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just taking credit for the business's success, she was erasing me from it entirely. My blood ran cold. I had been the one who had made the farm what it was. Without me, there would be no farm. But there she was, standing in front of a crowd, basking in applause and pretending like it was all her doing, like she had built it from the ground up, and I couldn't even get a simple acknowledgement. I stayed in my seat, trying to keep my face neutral, but I could feel the heat in my cheeks, the sting of betrayal. It wasn't just a slap in the face, it was a full-on assault. She had taken everything from me, the farm, my father's pride, my work. And now she was taking the credit, too. I couldn't do it anymore. The frustration, the bitterness, the anger, it was too much to swallow. And I knew then that something had to change. The night of the 15th anniversary party, I could feel it in the air. Something was off. The ballroom was full of business partners, clients, and friends, all mingling and chatting. The place looked like something out of a magazine with its sparkling lights and catered food. But all I could do was watch Lila float around like she was the queen of it all, greeting people like they were her personal fan club. I could hear the buzz of conversation, but it was like a distant hum in my ears. My heart was beating too fast, and every time I saw her smile, I felt a weight pushing down on my chest. When she finally took the stage to give her speech, I had a sick feeling that something was coming. She'd been practicing for days, running lines, adjusting her tone like she was rehearsing for some big presentation. I knew it was coming, but hearing it was a whole different kind of betrayal. Lila stepped up to the microphone, her perfectly styled hair catching the light as she smiled out at the crowd. "Thank you, everyone, for being here to celebrate the farm's success. It's been a journey," she said, voice sweet as honey. "But now it's time for the next chapter." The room went quiet. She paused for dramatic effect, and I could feel everyone's eyes on her, waiting for the big reveal. "As the future of this company, I'm excited to announce that we're going to shift the business into a more sustainable and scalable model," she continued, her voice gaining momentum. "It's clear that the farm needs modern leadership to succeed, and I'm ready to take us there." Modern leadership. Those words hit me like a slap in the face. I could feel my blood run cold as I looked around the room. Everyone was nodding, smiling, and I was standing there, suddenly very aware of how small I was in the space, as if I didn't belong here. And then she said it. "I've been working with the farm for a while now, and it's clear that the company needs to move beyond its old ways," Lila said. "While Jenna has done a fine job with the operational side of things, we need someone with a formal education and real business experience to take the company forward." The room felt like it was closing in. My stomach twisted into knots, and I couldn't breathe. She wasn't just announcing her vision for the future, she was telling everyone that I wasn't enough, that all the years I'd poured into this farm, all the sweat and blood I'd given, meant nothing compared to her polished corporate expertise. Lila smiled as she shifted gears, casually tossing in, "For the good of the company, Jenna has decided to step down and let me take full control. This is a graceful transition, one that ensures the farm can grow and thrive under new leadership." Graceful transition. She said it like I was handing over the reins with a smile, like this was all part of the plan. Like I wasn't watching my entire life's work being thrown away with a few smooth words. The room was silent now, all eyes on me. I don't know if anyone noticed how my face froze. I didn't argue, though I wanted to scream, to tell them all how much I had built, how much I had sacrificed. But I couldn't find the words. It was like they'd all been drained from me in an instant, sucked out by the weight of her betrayal. The worst part? Dad wasn't even looking at me. He wasn't stepping in or even giving me a glance. His attention was fully on Lila, nodding like she was the one who had worked the land, who had built this business. I didn't even stay for the rest of the speech. I couldn't. The room felt suffocating, and I knew if I stayed there any longer, I would lose everything I had left, my pride, my dignity. So I did the only thing I could think to do. I stood up and walked out. The sound of my heels clacking against the marble floor echoed like a drum beat in my head. I kept my back straight, my head high, even though everything inside me was breaking. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I stepped out into the cold night air, the crisp breeze hitting my face like a slap. For a moment, I stood there, letting the chill wash over me, just trying to breathe. I didn't know what came next, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let her take it all. Not without a fight. I didn't go back to the party, didn't even think about it. As soon as I left the ballroom, I went straight home, threw on a sweatshirt, and locked myself in my room. I could feel the sting of Lila's words still burning in my chest, but I didn't have time to let it consume me. I couldn't. If I let myself wallow, I'd lose everything I'd worked for, and I wasn't about to let that happen. I opened my laptop and dove into the numbers. I needed to know where I stood. I pulled up the farm's financials and started digging through the legal agreements. For hours, I sifted through contracts, profit margins, and balance sheets, piecing together the puzzle. I knew the farm had been growing, but I didn't know how much. The more I dug, the more I realized how much power I had been leaving on the table. And then it hit me. There were key details about the ownership structure I hadn't paid attention to before. I had more control than I thought. My name was on the majority of the shares. I could feel a rush of blood to my head as I saw the numbers clearly. I owned this. Not entirely, but enough. Enough to take back what was mine. I sat back for a second, letting that sink in. Lila had been running the show, but I was the one with the real leverage. I wasn't just some sidelined worker. I was the one who had built the farm from the ground up. I kept working, though. This wasn't just about ownership, it was about the future. I needed to make sure I wasn't just left with scraps when she took the spotlight. So I started drafting my own plans, a new business, one that would leverage the farming innovations I'd developed, the crop rotations, the soil management techniques, everything I had built. But I wasn't going to make the same mistakes as before. I'd learned that the hard way. This time, I'd run the business the right way. No more shadows, no more being invisible. I didn't reach out to Lila or Dad that night. I wasn't going to do anything rash, but I needed to let things settle. I didn't want to burn every bridge just yet. Instead, I quietly reached out to some of our major clients and partners. Just a quick email, nothing flashy. I kept it professional, factual. I explained the recent changes and let them know that I'd be heading a new venture. I didn't make any demands. I wasn't looking for a fight. I just wanted to make sure they knew what was going on. When I hit send, I took a deep breath. The first step was done. I didn't sleep much that night. Too many thoughts, too much weighing on me. The quiet clacking of my keyboard was the only sound in the house, but by the time the sun started creeping through the blinds, I knew exactly what I was going to do the next morning. I had a plan now, a real one, and I was done waiting around for approval. Tomorrow, I was going to take back what was mine. The next morning, I got to the farm early. The place was quiet, the sun still low, casting long shadows over the fields. It was a strange calm, like everything was holding its breath. I stood in the office, waiting. The smell of coffee was still thick in the air from when I'd made it, but the cup in front of me sat untouched. I couldn't drink it. I was too wired, too angry, too ready. Lila and Dad were supposed to be here soon, and when they walked in, I was going to hit them with everything I'd uncovered. I'd spent the whole night looking through legal agreements, financial documents, piecing everything together. It was time to make my move. When they finally walked in together, Lila, in one of her perfectly tailored suits, Dad with his usual worn-out jeans and flannel. I didn't stand up. I stayed seated, my eyes cold, steady on them. Neither of them seemed to notice right away that something was different. They were too wrapped up in their own world. Lila gave me that same look, half pity, half superiority, and Dad gave me a half smile like he was about to tell me something important. I let the silence stretch for a moment, letting them both settle before I spoke. I know what you've been up to, I said, keeping my voice calm, even though my insides were a storm. And I think it's time we get a few things straight. They both froze, exchanging a quick look, before Lila raised an eyebrow. What are you talking about? She asked, trying to sound casual, but I could hear the edge creeping into her voice. I own the majority of the farm's shares, I said, watching the color drain from her face. Not you, Lila. Not you, Roy. Me. The words hit like a punch. Lila blinked, stunned. Roy's face went pale, his jaw tightening as he took a step back. I could tell the news landed like a lead weight in his chest. You what? Lila's voice cracked, but she quickly recovered, trying to push through the shock. You're lying. That's not possible. I'm not lying, I said, shaking my head slowly. I've been watching this for a long time, Lila. The farm was growing, but I was always kept on the sidelines. You and Dad, you were too busy making decisions without involving me. You were so busy looking for the next shiny thing that you didn't even notice how much control I already had. I took a breath, letting that sink in before I dropped the next bomb. And the farming techniques, the ones you've been touting as your innovations, those are mine too, I continued. I hold the licensing agreements through my new company. All those processes you've been selling to our clients, every method you've presented as your big ideas, they belong to me, not you. The room went still. I could hear Lila's breath catch. Roy looked like he'd seen a ghost, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to form a response. I've also reached out to our major clients and partners, I went on, told them about the leadership changes, the new direction the farm is going in. I kept my voice steady, but the satisfaction of seeing their faces was enough to fuel my words. Most of them are planning to terminate their contracts with the farm. They're going to follow me and my new venture instead. Lila's face twisted with disbelief, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. You can't be serious, she hissed. You think they'll actually leave the farm for you? Yeah, I do, I said, standing now. I wasn't going to sit back down like I was the one who'd been caught off guard. Because I've built something real, something that isn't just about image or numbers on a piece of paper. It's about the land, about the work, about what we've done here from the beginning. Lila's anger flared. You've always been so stupid about this. It's just business. You're letting your emotions cloud everything. It's not just business, I shot back, my voice hard. It's my business, and it always has been. You just never bothered to see it. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence between us felt thick, suffocating. Finally, Roy spoke, his voice quiet but full of defeat. Jenna, what do you want? I turned to him, my gaze steady. I want control. I want the farm, the business, everything. If you're willing to step down and let me take it, I'll work with you. I'll make sure Lila gets a severance package, glowing references. But I'm in charge now. I'm running things. Lila opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off before she could say anything. No more meetings behind my back. No more pretending like you own this place. I'm done with the games. She glared at me, her fists still clenched, her face a mix of fury and disbelief. Roy didn't say anything else, but I could see the weight of everything I'd just dropped on him settling in. His shoulders slumped, the pride he once held in the farm looking like it was crumbling away. I'm not asking for your permission, I added. This is what's happening. You can either accept it or walk away. The look in Roy's eyes was a mix of resignation and something else. Maybe shame, maybe fear. But it didn't matter. The decision was made. And I wasn't backing down. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Lila's eyes were still burning with rage, and Roy stood there, looking like the wind had been knocked out of him. I could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on me, but I didn't waver. This was it, the point of no return. I took a deep breath, and when I spoke, my voice was steady, calm. Here's the deal, I said. You both have a choice. You can either resign and let me take full control of the farm, or I'll take everything. My shares, my clients, the technology, the employees, everything. I let that hang in the air for a moment, watching the shock register on their faces. Roy shifted on his feet, his hands trembling slightly like he was trying to hold on to something that was slipping away. Lila opened her mouth to speak, but I didn't give her a chance. No, I said, holding up a hand to stop her. This is how it's going to be. If you choose to walk away, I'll make sure Lila gets a severance package. She'll have glowing references. I won't screw her over, but she's done with this farm. She won't be involved anymore. Not in any way. Lila's face twisted, but I kept going, keeping my tone controlled, even though every part of me wanted to scream. If you refuse this, then the farm as you know it will cease to exist. There's no middle ground here. No more compromises. It's either this or you walk away with nothing. Lila's jaw clenched. She was furious, her body rigid with anger. You can't just take everything like that, she shot back. Her voice was high, the kind of desperate pitch that comes from realizing you're losing control. You think you can just... I cut her off, my words sharp but calm. I'm not taking anything that isn't mine. I've earned it. Everything I've built is in my hands now. You don't get to rewrite history just because you've got a nice resume. You've been in charge of nothing but your own image. Lila stepped forward, but I didn't flinch. I didn't move an inch. You're not just going to walk away with everything, Jenna. You deserve nothing, I said, my voice steady. You've never done the work. Not really. Not like I have. My words were cold, biting. You built your career on my blood, sweat, and tears, Lila, and now I'm taking it back. Her face reddened, and she opened her mouth to argue again, but Roy stepped in, his voice low and strained. Jenna, stop. His words came out broken, like he was pleading. This is too much. You can't just... Yes, I can. I interrupted, my voice rising now, though I kept it controlled. I can do this because it's mine. It always has been. I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time, and I saw a man who'd spent years building something, only to watch it crumble in front of him. The pride he'd had for this farm was draining away, replaced by something else, something I didn't have a name for. You think you can just tear everything apart, Jenna? Just like that? Roy's voice was rough, like it physically hurt to say the words. He sounded defeated, like he knew it was over but didn't know how to stop it. All those years, all of it. It was never yours to keep, I said, my words sharp but true. Not really. You didn't build this alone, and you sure as hell didn't protect me when I needed it. Now it's my turn. Lila's eyes were wild now, her hands shaking with frustration. But I didn't look away. I kept my gaze steady, like I was holding my ground in a storm. Finally, she slumped back in her chair, defeated in a way that made my stomach churn. She couldn't believe it. But she wasn't going to win this one. Not now. Choose, I said, the words final. It's up to you. But whatever you decide, the farm's future is mine to shape now. I'm taking the reins. I didn't wait for them to respond. I turned and walked out of the office, leaving them behind, not once glancing back. I knew I'd given them a choice, but I also knew what the answer would be. Lila's pride wouldn't let her stay, and Roy, he'd already given up. The weight of what I'd just done hit me as soon as I stepped outside. The air was still, the field stretching out in front of me like an endless horizon. For the first time in a long while, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. It wasn't over, not yet, but it would be soon. And I would rebuild everything. Starting now. The weeks that followed felt like a blur. Lila was gone, packing up her things and moving on to a new career in corporate consulting. She didn't say much when she left, just a few cold words about how I was making a huge mistake. But I didn't care. She wasn't my problem anymore. She'd never been part of the farm in the way I was, and she was too caught up in her own world to see it. Roy, though, he didn't leave right away. But it was clear the farm, this place we'd both built, had crumbled in a way he couldn't repair. He retired soon after. Said he was tired, but I knew the truth. He couldn't face what had happened. He couldn't look at me without seeing the wreckage of everything he'd held on to for so long. And I didn't blame him. In some ways, I was still holding that wreckage too. I spent those first few months alone, turning the farm into something completely new. My ideas, my vision, they took root in ways I hadn't expected. The soil was healthier, the crops more abundant, and the farm's value tripled in a year. It wasn't just about the money, though. It was about proving I could make something real, something lasting. The old methods, the ones I'd worked to perfect, were finally taking center stage. My phone rang more often than it ever had, with calls from investors and clients who wanted in on what I was doing. Still, success didn't come without its price. The family that had once meant everything to me was gone. The connections, the laughter, the late night talks about the farm's future, it all felt like something from another lifetime. Even though the farm was thriving, there was a hollowness inside of me I couldn't shake. The emptiness that came from knowing my father would never look at me the same way, that Lila and I would never share a bond again. The betrayal ran too deep to forget. Then came the invitation to speak at that agricultural conference. They wanted me to talk about innovation in farming, about the methods I'd developed and how they had revolutionized our operation. It was everything I'd ever worked for, a chance to finally step into the spotlight, to show the world that my hard work, not some polished image, had built this farm. I stood on that stage, talking about the years I'd spent perfecting soil health, improving crop yield, creating processes that had changed everything. The audience listened, their attention focused on every word. I could see the nods of approval, hear the quiet murmurs of admiration. But when I looked out into the crowd, I couldn't help but think of Lila, of Roy. I wondered if they'd ever be able to look at me and see what I had done, what I had truly built. I still kept the photo album of the early days of the farm, the days when it was just the three of us before everything turned into what it was now. Sometimes, when I was alone, I'd flip through it, remembering the small moments. But I couldn't bring myself to show it to Roy, not yet. Maybe one day I'd find the courage to reach out. Maybe one day I'd be able to bridge the gap between us. But for now, the farm was all I had, and I was okay with that. The farm, my work, would outlast the betrayal. It would outlast everything. And that was enough for me.